Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Blender tutorial where today we are going to be using math and nodes and, just vile processes to get to this result, which you might think, oh, it's a particle system, but it's not. We have complete control over this, and that means we can get a whole bunch of different results just using the node network that we created. So again, this is the thing we're going to be making. It's kind of like a particle vortex a portal thing. I don't know. I've been able to get a lot of different results from this using, a couple nodes. You can see there's some swirly action going on. I'll talk about how to do that, how to generate the particles. But long story short, just so you do have a bit of an idea of what we're going to do here, I'm basically going to divide a circle into a bunch of chunks and give them some motion properties. And the more chunks we have, like 100 or maybe 500, etc., it's going to look more and more distorted. And we also have control over things like, I don't know, whatever this slider does. I guess this one's the main size. And this one's like the main outward size. So either way, let me show you how to do this using Blender. So I'm going to be using version 3.0 alpha. You can use whatever you want since it's shader nodes, and the things that we're going to be using haven't been updated in a while. And it feels good to do a shader tutorial again because everything's geometry nodes now. We need to return back to fundamental shader node values. So plane, we're going to be looking from the top view down at it so that anything we do is going to be directly in our viewport, and let's make that a black background. First thing I want to do is I want to have access to a circle or a ring and be able to divide it into chunks and move them. In other words, I want to switch from Cartesian coordinates to polar coordinates. If you don't know what that means, guys, basically I want a coordinate system that does not look like this object coordinate where it's either X and Y and some combination of it. No, I want to know how far away we are from the center and the angle. That's what polar coordinates are. By the way, all these node previews up top, it's an add-on called Node Preview, link in the description, just so you know, but it helps visualize the math going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert our standard object coordinate system into polar coordinates. So again, we need a length and we need an angle. For the length, super easy. You take vector math, you plug this into this. So now we have our coordinate system, and I just want to output the length. In other words, the radius. And you can see right here what that does. When it's at the center, we have radius 0, and then it expands outwards. The second thing we need is we need polar coordinates. And here's just the equation for that. It's super simple. We are going to separate our coordinate system, again, our Cartesian coordinates, into the x, the y, the z, whatever. And all we need to do is run a arctangent of y over x. In fact, arctan 2. What this is going to do is it's going to take the first output divided by the second output, so y divided by x, and then take an arctangent, which is why we're using arctan 2. Don't worry about it. Long story short, let me do that. Long story short, this is how we get a coordinate system. One thing you might notice, though, is that, and veteran viewers will already know this, the angle kind of goes from 0 to pi in this direction, and then 0 to negative pi in that direction, and I want to see all the angles. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remap this. So we're going to go from minus pi to pi and send that to 0 to 1. So in other words, we're taking this messed up angle system where it goes from 0 to pi, 0 to negative pi. We're remapping it to a 0 to 1 interval. So it goes whoop as we go around. Again, in other words, what we've done is we've cleaned this up by saying when it's 0, we have this, and then as we go to 1, we have that. Okay? Cool. So long story short, these are our two outputs we care the most about, the length function and the angle function. And now what we can do is we can do things to make a effect. So here's what I've done to do that. So first of all, we're going to take the length. This is going to be the main thing we're using to map our visual thing. And I'm going to use a compare function. What this ends up looking like, as you can see, is a ring that we can control the thickness of. And we can also control the size of. This makes sense because we're comparing the radius to some number, which happens as we go outwards. We're comparing it to some number, and we're saying make it white if it's within some threshold. So the bigger the threshold, the bigger the ring, and the bigger the value, the larger the circle is going to be because we're comparing the radius to something bigger. Either way, what if, and here's the main idea, what if we take this kind of compare function, and instead of giving it like one value to kind of like compare it to, what if for each section of the angle we compare it to something different? So for example, if I take this angle result and put it in here, you can see immediately we get a spiral, but we can do other stuff to this as well. So that's the theory. What I actually am going to do in practice is I'm going to take this angle thing, I'm going to separate it into a bunch of random numbers, and those random numbers are going to drive what we're comparing it to, so that each chunk is compared to a random thing. How do we do that? Well, first of all, this is going from 0 to 1. I'm going to have it go from 0 to, and I'll make this a parameter since we're going to be probably using this one a lot. By the way, sorry if I keep hitting the wire. I'm trying not to. Either way, let's make this 10 or something. So I'm going to go from 0 to 10 because we're basically multiplying it by 10. So I pick a number. What I do is I say I want to make this discrete, not a continuum from 0 to 1, but just a bunch of integers. So ceiling function gives us the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it gets kind of hard to see. But these are now just 10 values in each sector. We want to generate random numbers, and the fastest way to do that is with a white noise. And you can see, boom, we have random stuff, or we could look at that in a one-dimensional sense. So again, what white noise does is it takes the input coordinates, and for every coordinate, it outputs some random number between 0 and 1. Because each sector is some integer before we get this discrete thing. If we did not have this, you see we kind of have an issue. Okay, so we have random numbers for the sectors, which again, the whole theory behind this is if we now compare it to this number, we've broken up our circle into chunks. Look at that. If we were to generate different random numbers, we get different kinds of results, and this is another thing you can do. But now that we have this, we have, we have the thing, we can control how many numbers we're generating, etc. So you can see right here, we have more rays as we do this, a nice interactive way to view that. I want to take this and make it animatable, if possible. So instead of just outputting this random number, let's send it through some kind of periodic function. Of course, sine and cosine, those are the easiest. So I'm going to send this through a sine function. I'm also going to animate the input. So if we add something, you can see it kind of gives it this pulsing thing. Again, I'm taking a random number, which you can think of as a phase or something like that. I'm adding in some thing that I'm going to constantly animate, and then I'm going to take a sine function. So for this addition, let's just make sure this animates forever. I'm going to do that by making a driver. So this is going to be the hash frame driver, the only driver in existence, really. It just outputs the frame numbers. On frame 1, gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. And to make time go a bit slower, I'm just going to make it divide by 20. So it's 20 times slower, let's say. And you can see it's pulsing. One issue, though, is, again, sine goes from -1 to 1. Kind of the same issue we had with the angle from before with negative pi to pi. So we just need to remap this. So you can see these random numbers are, doing the thing. We just need to remap it. So I'm just going to do a map range, and instead of going from -1 to 1, so let's map -1 to 1 to 0 to 1. And by the way, since this is a radial effect, the way you want to think about this is these numbers are saying how big and small can this get. So if it goes to 0, you can see it shrinks to a point, right? If we say 0.2 instead, when it goes inwards, it will stop a bit before converging. And if I make this 0.4, there's going to be very little variation because it's going from radius 0.2 to 0.4, etc. And this is a cool loading animation. This is one of the effects that you can get. But I'm going to do something like this, 0.2 to 1. And let's try increasing our segment count so we have more random numbers. Now, one thing you might notice is that obviously these are all offset by a bit because there's this random thing going on, but they kind of look like they're moving roughly in unison. If you do not want this, you want each of them acting independently visually, all we need to do, and this happens because these random numbers only go between 0 and 1, so there's only so much variation there could be. So if we just take this random output and scale it by 20, or so here's 1, nothing changes. The larger this is, the more variation we have. But you just multiply it by a big number, so 30, a large variation. So this is our variation node. They all look like they act independently. And by the way, let me make this a bit smaller so the outer radius isn't as big. Okay, fine, they all act independently, which means the bigger we make this, kind of the more like a particle system this ends up looking like. So let's increase this number. So there we go. We have a nice little particle system. And you can see that even though this kind of looks like maybe I don't know, it looks like a pretty interesting effect. What you need to remember is at the end of the day, this was ultimately just controlled by like a couple like segments. So you can see here's like the 5 segments, and as you increase it, it gets crazier. Okay, now let's make this thing look visually pleasing. We have the theory of it, how to make it look like this, but let's make it look good. One thing I want to do is this compare function, which is the thickness of these like segments. I want to bring those down so they kind of look like less stretched and more like independent particle dots. So this is going to be our stretching value. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing I want to do is I want to kind of like hide the center. So it kind of looks like it's going into a black hole. Easy enough. So you just take this whole output. I'm going to multiply it by, in other words, give it a strength of, so you can see multiplication is the strength. I'm going to give it a strength of this gradient we made, which is the length function, because it's 0 in the center. So you can see it's kind of softer there. And we can make that more intense like this. So we take a power function. So you can see here's our radial thing. And as we increase the exponent to something bigger, if it actually updates, there we go. As we increase the exponent, it gets more, and the fall off becomes more intense. But this makes it so that the particles look like they're going into a abyss over here. Okay, that looks cool. Let's add in a bit more variation very easily. So I'm thinking right here at the beginning with the coordinate system, if we were to do some stuff to this, like distortion, rotation, whatever, anything we do over here is going to get carried out to basically this is basically the logic behind our particle system. So I'm just going to distort the initial coordinates. And by the way, let's do a save. I'm going to call this thing available on Patreon. Yay, because it is. And there's a link in the description for that. But you're going to learn how to make it here. So let's do 2 things to our particle system. First of all, I'm going to distort it. The standard way to do this is you add a source of randomness, like this noise texture. I'm going to make sure to use the same coordinate system in this noise texture that we're planning to distort. So I'm going to introduce a source of randomness. We incorporate this by just mixing them together then. So I take my coordinate system and then mix it with the source of randomness, which you can see gives a weird result. So you just want to change this to linear light for a technical reason. But long story short, this prevents the shifting from happening. So you can see here's our coordinate system, and here's our like distorted version that stays centered is the idea. If this was set to mix RGB, the issue with this is as we add distortion, you can see the whole thing shifts down. So linear light. So I'm just going to add very little distortion, and I'm going to decrease the scale of the noise. So it's kind of low frequency detail. So you can see I'm just kind of distorting the circle that it's using. So I'm just going to add a bit of randomness right there. I want this also to be animated. So I'm going to make it a 4-dimensional noise, which basically means that as we increase this W slider, it's going to give it some wiggle, just to give it a bit more like life and looks like a organic thing. So again, I'm just going to control this with a driver over time. So the hash frame gives us the frame number. We take it, and I'm just going to divide it by, with the W, it's best to use a big denominator, I found, because it's very sensitive to this W 4-dimensional slider. So this is subtle, but it's going to add in a bit of, extra detail. Another thing we can do is that we can have it kind of vortex into the center instead of just kind of like going in and out of it. And by the way, again, I just want to reiterate, we have control over everything here. I can at any time decrease the segment count and get a different result that looks like this, right? We can do a lot to control this, but I just want to add in a bit of a vortex rotation. So again, what I'm going to do is before we even do, so we have our coordinate system, we have our distortion system using noise. I just want to rotate the coordinates and give it a vortex before that even happens. So to do that, I'm going to use the vector rotate node since it rotates vectors. And the way this is going to work once it loads is it's basically going to let us orbit it around the center using this angle value. So you can see this is what it's actually doing to the coordinate system. It's just spinning it. I want that, but I don't want to have this thing rotate uniformly, which is to say I don't want the rotation to be the same everywhere. I want it to kind of vortex like a whirlpool. The rotation should get more and more intense as we go towards the center, I guess, or something like that. Easy way to do that is if we need some kind of gradient to define our rotation that says how far away are we from the center, is that not exactly the length function from before, right? So I'm actually going to calculate a new length function instead of using the previous one. One, to not create dependencies, circular dependencies, but also this is the version that has not yet been distorted or anything like that. So even this length function is a bit distorted, as you can see. So I'm just going to calculate a new one, use this as the angle, And you can see once this loads, this kind of gives us a vortex. You can see it a bit better here because the rotation is dependent on the radial thing. To make it more intense, let's increase the kind of the strength or the magnitude of this rotation. So right now it's kind of going from 0 to whatever radius. You multiply it by a bigger number and the rotation gets more intense, kind of like you're spinning a lollipop. And this gives it, a thing. This way we can control not only the strength of it, but also we can flip it and it can go the other way. So there we go. Some people might say that it'd be good to have a quadratic fall off or something like that. That would just make it have a bit of variation as it goes out. I don't know. It's a thing you could do. So here's without linear kind of scaling right there. And this is quadratic. Okay, cool. So what do we have so far? We have a particle system that is rotated. We can control the segment count, which I always like to look back on. So where is the slider for this? Here we go. So again, just distorted segments. It's very simple, but it creates this nice particle system. I'm going to take this. Let's throw it through a emission just to make it brighter. And since we're in EV, let's take advantage of that bloom. I'm going to make it brighter until it glows a bit. That looks cool. And by the way, as you make it brighter, this kind of thing we did here tends to work a little less. So you just want to increase that. But there you go. We have a basic particle system, and it's just existing on a plane. So you could do a lot with this. You could actually replace your object coordinates with UV coordinates and put this on any surface. You could put your little vortex on a sphere, whatever. But, basic vortex. So we have control over the segment count, the type of rotation, the overall behavior. So remember, how big is this going to be? And how far out is it going to reach? So are the particles going to stay very close to the rim, very far away? We have control over all of that. We also have a fall off slider. We also have control over kind of like how much this one's kind of weird. It's like what amount of the angle are we using? So this is something that would be typically kind of hard to do with like a particle system. But we can do some weird stuff with this. So yeah. Okay, I think I've said enough about this. So once you've made this project and you can mess around with the nodes, just pick something you like and we're going to go render it out. In my case, I like the look of this thing, so I want to be able to render this out. But let's say that my computer is a piece of garbage or I just want to render faster. Well, in that case, you want to be using a render farm. Specifically, Concierge Render is a Blender render farm that you can just send your blend files to and they'll render a bit faster. And by a bit, I mean a lot. So let me show you how to use this. So first of all, once you have your blend ready, make sure it's saved, but we just need to do two things for preparation. First of all, and this is just so that everything imports in smoothly and we don't bring in a bigger blend file. First of all, make sure you go to cleanup your unused data blocks. We don't need it being bloated by things we've already deleted. And second of all, external data. In this case, it doesn't matter, but make sure you click this automatically pack resources. So if you have any image textures, HDRIs, or whatever that your scene is dependent on, it will pack those. So our blend file is ready, and I will meet you over at Concierge Render to render this thing. Okay, this is conciergerender.com. If you do not already have an account, make one, and you're going to get $5 in free render credits, which is plenty. It will let you render this project very easily. Shouldn't even take anywhere near that amount. But either way, make an account. I already have one, so I'm just going to log into mine. So I've already used up my $5 in free render credits. And you can see I have a bit of a balance. And what we need to do is basically import in this blend and then use this balance to render it. So first of all, upload and launch renders. I'm going to upload the blend file. Where is it? I don't know, but I think I called it available on Patreon because I'm a slimy boy. So we're just going to wait for this to upload. Shouldn't take too long. You then take the blend file that I just uploaded today, actions, launch render. It's going to think about it, and then we just tell it what render engine to use, how many samples to throw at it, and other settings that you can either pick here or you could have picked when you made your blend file. So I'll be back in a second for that. Okay, so here are some settings. First of all, render platform. I think we use 3.0 alpha, but because 2.93 is the most updated one, we're going to be using this one because I think it's 100% compatible. So newest version of Blender. Render engine, usually I pick Cycles. This is one of those very rare times where Eevee is actually what we use to make this, and Cycles won't really benefit from this. So we're going to keep it at Eevee. Render type animation, you can see basically it's taken these default settings settings from our blend file, so whatever. Frames, 12250 is fine. Native resolution. And then finally for hardware, usually there's more options if you're using cycles, but when you're Eevee, it's streamlined. You're using this one, fine. Click render, and this will actually make a render job that we can see from the job manager. We view the details, and you can see it's going to get ready. It's going to start rendering stuff out, and we're going to see the details over here. And okay, the render's done. You can see all the frames exist over here, which we can actually like view, preview, and download. Cool. All the frames have been made. Here are the details. It costs 30 cents to do the entire render. So again, $5 is plenty, especially if you're doing Eevee projects like we are. Either way, you could download them one by one like a fucking like lunatic, or just go to download outputs. That's going to make a zip file where you have a PNG sequence in this case. But yeah, that's how you render with Concierge Render. Pretty much any project, you follow that process. So if your computer is like slow, or if you have a bigger project and you have a beefy computer, but project's just too big, you need a render farm, Concierge Render, it exists, it's great, and I've used it for a bunch of projects. So there you go. Hopefully you learned something about making portals, because if you didn't, your eyes must have been closed, and yeah, thanks for watching.